Howdy folks, howdy. Sean Brock here with you once again. Remind you to please subscribe. I would certainly appreciate it. We try to have some stuff going on, plenty of guitars and mandolins and nonsense. And this deal here, man, this is a good deal here. Zalogy, man, these are nice. Blackfire, Zalogy Blackfire, key of A. So, we've been doing this thing. This is the second time, and we're going to have a playlist going of the songs and stories. And something that I get asked about a lot is, do you come from a musical family? And the answer is sort of, but not really, not entirely. My great-grandfather on my mother's side, we always called him Poppy. And Poppy played the Jew's harp or the jaw harp, whichever you'd rather call it. And Poppy was an interesting individual because some of his relatives actually traveled through Cumberland Gap with Captain Boone and went all the way up to Boonesboro, up around Lexington, Kentucky, Fort Boonesboro, and settled up there. And so he actually came back down to eastern Kentucky in his youth. His family moved a couple hours back south and east, and Poppy was the closest thing to a musician that we had in the family. And he would play the jaw harp, and I can barely remember all that. He died when I was pretty young, but his sister was the mother of Bobby and Sonny Osborne, the Osborne Brothers. And I get some flack, but I'm always honest with people. I've met Bob and Sonny several times throughout my life, and before their deaths. A friend of mine is hugely influenced by the Osborne Brothers. He thinks it's nothing like their harmonies, and and no doubt they have contributed so much, had a very distinct and notable sound. But kind of in my early stages of bluegrass music, I didn't really enjoy them that much, and I rarely listen to them now. I found Bobby and Sonny to be a little aloof, because by the time I started playing up in the early 90s and running into them at festivals, and I always played for several years, played over there at the Memorial Festival, Osborne Brothers Homecoming Festival, that's now the Memorial Festival in Hyden, Kentucky, in Leslie County, which is where they're from and where my mom's side of the family is from. But I would see them over there and things, and they had kind of gotten hardened by music, I think, a little bit, and traveling, and they were a little aloof and standoffish. They were a little grumpy at times, I guess you could say. And I don't know, some of their musical stuff, they're adding drums, steel guitars, and things that they did. Especially in the 70s. It just didn't appeal to me in the 90s, though I always had a great respect for them. So they never did anything for me, and I never did anything for them, but those are the kind of the closest people in my family that played. And it's interesting, though, my mom and dad always listened to a lot of music, and my grandparents, everybody listened to music. And that was a huge influence on me. I can remember Mom, she would listen to kind of pop and rock back in the 80s. And my dad, he listened to a lot of, he had very diverse tastes in music. And I kind of followed after both of them, but I was a little more diverse, I guess, like Dad was. But he listened to a lot of the country music of the day, of 80s and 90s, and he listened to very traditional country music. He was a big fan of George Jones and Merle Haggard. He was a fan of Waylon, and also he was a big fan of kind of the hippie rock of John Fogerty, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Simon and Garfunkel. He turned me on to a lot of that stuff, when I was very, very young. So I had some pretty eclectic listening experience, and Dad was a big bluegrass fan too. And he and I could ride down the road together for his entire life, and anything he would put on the stereo to listen to, I generally was just right there digging it. We didn't have very much difference in taste, it seemed like. And Mom, she listened to like U2, I remember, and Rod Stewart, and some of those people. And people say, who have you not worked with that you would love to work with? And I would say down through the years, Rod Stewart, Alan Jackson, George Strait. That's definitely three of the guys that I admired. And, you think about how much different Rod Stewart is than any of them. And Rod Stewart might be sort of like the Osborne Brothers of pop and rock. He took a lot of different directions in his career. But I always admired a lot of his music, the elements. He would pop up and have a lot of acoustic stuff with fiddle and mandolin, but he had some rocky stuff and some poppy stuff, and then he got into doing a jazz bit, and I knew he would pull it off, but I was always surprised at how well he did it. But that was kind of the extent of music for me, and I just remember my entire life hearing music on, and I wanted to play music from a very, very early age. And when Poppy passed away, his wife, my great-grandmother, was also just a huge influence on me, both in life and in music. I mean, she was one of the most saintly people I ever knew. And she was on a walker clear back then in the early 80s, and there would be a gentleman named Bentley Nolan, who's passed on now, who used to come to have church with her. And Bentley would come, and they would literally have a church service there at the house. And growing up in Eastern Kentucky in the 80s was about like being in the 50s anywhere else in the country, or even before. We were so isolated. Like Poppy's home was, it would take you a good hour to get to the closest interstate, which would be Interstate 75. And there was just a lot of isolation there, and there was a lot of tradition, a lot of Irish tradition passed through down my family, having wakes. I remember when Poppy died, them having his body at home and sitting up with it, but my great-grandmother, she had a very difficult time. She never drove, and she had a difficult time getting to church. So Bentley Nolan would come over and preach and sing and have church. And I would sit on the coffee table right in front of Bentley, about 3 or 4 feet in front of Bentley, and watch him play. He had an old 60s Martin D28 that he played, and had one of them blue Martin cases, And Bentley was a good singer and a good player. And you know, I learned a lot about spirituality through music and through watching Bentley, and all I wanted was one of one of them Martins and one of them old blue cases. Now, you know, it's funny. I saw one the other week, and a buddy of mine had a guitar in it, and he said, "Oh man," he said, "anybody's got one of these cases, they might as well throw them away. They're just junk." But you know, I mean, they're collectible. People like to put them with the you know, with guitars from that time period and things. But you know, for practical purposes, he thought they were junk anyway. But I remember I always wanted one of those. And you know, music, for some reason, I can remember being 3-4 years old and discovering people I liked. And when the song would come on the radio, I knew the song. You know, I would remember the artist, I remember the song, remember the words to the song. And when that artist would come out with a new song, even if I didn't hear it announced, you know, when I heard their voice singing, I knew who it was. And I'd never thought of that being an unusual knack at the time, I guess. It was just real natural, you know, for me. You know, I don't know, as people, you know, like Vern Gosdin, for example, to me was so distinct, or George Jones, or Dan Seals, any of those, anyone you want to name, it just seemed to me to be so obvious, you know. It's kind of like recognizing a picture of somebody. But I hounded my parents wanting to play, and it just never would happen. They always thought I was too young, not responsible enough, and things. And something that some people don't know, I think, is I have an eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which basically is a disease where your central vision becomes blurry and your peripheral vision shrinks in, and it's kind of like looking through a camera lens, and over time, you know, the tunnel just closes up more and more. And when I was almost 4, my mother became concerned because I would sit in front of the TV and watch cartoons, and we had an old RCA console TV, and I would sit there and my legs crossed, you know, on the floor, and I would be up with my knees touching the TV, and she would come and pull me back and say, "You're going to hurt your eyes, you'll get a headache." And a few minutes later, I would have squirmed back up to the same spot, and she took me to the eye doctor and found out about that. And you know, it was pretty devastating for my parents. They took me all over the country, and they discovered that my sister, I only have one sibling, they discovered that she had it too. She just hadn't reached the same stage the same stage of severity that I had. But this sort of marked me for a little while, you know, because the way I grew up, my dad was a coal miner, and Mom stayed at home until we were both in school. I'm younger than my sister, and she stayed home until I was in school. And then she went back to school and got her nursing degree, became an RN. But we raised a really big garden every year, and you know, we were expected to work. And so it kind of took my parents back. They didn't know much what to do. And there was a fellow in Harlan County where I grew up, very, very knowledgeable man, another big influence in my life, a fellow named Arthur Johnson, who was a blind fellow, much older. I want to say by that time in the, you know, mid 80s, Arthur was in his mid 40s, I would think, or late 40s. Good Lord, I'm the same age as Arthur was. But Arthur was he was a piano tuner, and he did so much of that in the county. He was the best around at piano work. Arthur ran the gift shop at the hospital. He owned that and ran that. Arthur had a couple of weekly columns in the Harlan Daily Enterprise newspaper. He had a radio show. He was a folk historian. He was a really good guitar player and singer and a harmonica player, an old-time clawhammer banjo player. He was very much a Doc Watson kind of sounding character. You could tell he got a lot of influence, from Doc. And Arthur, my dad ran up on Arthur one day. Arthur was walking somewhere, or my dad ran into him at a store. And he told Arthur about my eye condition. And he said, we just don't know what to do. They say there's nothing we can do. And I don't know what I need to do to raise him right, Arthur, And Arthur said, well, all you can do is just let him do whatever he wants to do. He said, set him out in the garden and make him work like you always did. He wants a bicycle, buy him a bicycle. Just treat him like you'd treat anybody, and everybody will figure it out. And that's what ended up happening. And I was always thankful to Arthur for that, because there for a minute it was a little touch and go with my parents. The hand-holding stage got a little much. But then when I started school, one of the things I liked a lot was baseball. And I was always kind of left out of that. I couldn't participate in that effectively and things. So I kept leaning on music, just wanting to play music. And then when I was 9, I started taking my first lessons. And I hung in there with it pretty well. Just from the onset, because I could, the same way I could recognize voices on the radio, I could recognize chords. So when I heard a chord, learned a chord, and then would learn the name of the chord, well, when I would listen to stuff on the radio or on cassette tapes, and heard the songs, I'd hear the chords in them. And that was always a big benefit to me, because later on, like when I was living in Nashville and doing so much studio work and things, I'd sit around and write charts pretty effectively, even though most of the time I never needed to. I could just kind of memorize the song, just one of those things that once I heard it, I knew it. But I started taking lessons when I was 9, and life was a little bit tough, especially growing up around here back during that time, because when it got time for me to start school, elementary school, the local elementary, Green Hills Elementary, we had a principal over there named Linda White, who didn't want me to go to school, and wanted to kick my sister out. My sister was working regular print books and everything, and once she found out, man, she wanted to kick her out. And my dad actually had to go to Congressman Hal Rogers, and make some pretty severe threats for us to be able to go to school. And when I started, I learned at the same time as learning print, I learned Braille. So, things were just a little tough until I started playing. I always had friends and things, but it always come down to, well, here's this, that, or the other that I can't do or do as well as somebody else. And then when I started playing music and playing guitar, my best friend After I'd been doing it about 6 months or so, he said, "Man, I'm going to do that. I'm going to learn to play." And he went and got lessons just like me. And one day he said, "You're so lucky. You can play this and that and this, that, and the other." And he said, "I can't. I just can't do it." He said, "But I will be able to. I will be able to. I'll be up there and I'll be as good as you." And I was very prideful about it. And I said, "Let me tell you something, buddy. You'll never be as good as me." Because he and I were just such good friends, and he ended up. He was a very talented football player, and he was a lineman, and he was just one of the best linebackers in the state and everything. But I was right. He never he gave the guitar up after a little while. And I remember us being in high school and riding to school together, you know. And he had colleges recruiting him and stuff, and we would stop at Dairy Queen and get breakfast every morning, just about. And we'd be talking and say, "Well, you know, such and such, as coach said, such and such is sending a scout out to see me, to watch me." And I said, "Man, you don't know how proud I am of you, buddy. But you know, you never did learn to play that guitar, you know." But things took a big turn for me when I started, because I loved it so much that I knew that there wasn't nothing I could do but succeed. It's all I thought about. You know, I would get up for school I would get up before I had to get up. I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and eat my breakfast and get ready so I could play the guitar for 30 minutes before I had to get on the school bus. And then, you know, on the way home, a lot of times I'd start my homework on the school bus and finish it up, or finish it as soon as I got home. That was always a rule in my house. There wasn't no laying around or doing this or taking a break from it. When you came home from school, if you had homework, you did it. But I would do my best to have that homework done real quick. And as soon as I remember Dad, he said, you're going, if I'm going to pay for lessons, you'll have to practice at least 30 minutes a day. And I mean, I would get my homework done, and I would play for hours, just hours on end. You know, stop for supper and maybe watch a Braves or a Reds game and watch Andy Griffith and get right back into playing. You know, and that was I just and I enjoyed that. Here I was, you know, here's this kid that already behind the curve, and I had something that other people couldn't do and other kids couldn't do. And then when I was later, when I was a little past 10, I started playing and getting paid, and that was a huge deal. You know, I didn't there wasn't very many people. There was a couple kids that would go around and cut grass or something, but man, I would make more money on a gig than they would, you know, mowing 3 or 4 yards. And you know, things just kind of progressed in that way for me. But you know, I didn't come from a musical family. I see and have so many friends that their parents played and their grandparents played, and just all through the generations. And mine wasn't that way. You know, everybody, all the males in my family, every single one of them up to me, had worked in coal mining in some form or fashion. And you know, it was back then you were respected and you were a hero, you know, because the dangers involved in it. And of course now you're a villain, you know, but it was the only good paying job in this area at the time. And they all worked in the mines, and they all had done military service, with the exception of Poppy. Poppy, he worked in the mines, and he became back during World War II, he was on the cutoff of being too old to join up. But once things finally hit the papers in the U.S. of what was going on in Europe, Poppy was so disgusted that he was working the mines in Harlan County, and they lived in a coal camp. He and my great-grandmother. And Poppy was so disgusted by what he saw that he went and enlisted. And they got him, and they figured out that he was flat-footed, and they wouldn't let him join. And he said, well, he asked a recruiter, he said, what can I do to help out with the war effort? I would, coal mining was enough, I thought. Coal mining and steel making was a lot of what won the war. But Poppy went, stayed away from home and worked in shipyards in Baltimore. He worked on shipbuilding there for quite a while because he felt like that was a great contribution, to the war effort and things. And he was the only one in the family that didn't do military service, but it was because he couldn't. But man, he sure did it, did it in other ways. And my great grandmother was always just a huge encourager to me, and she always took pride in telling me that she talked about when she was very young. She came from a large family, and her father actually had got injured really bad and was down sick, and the brothers were trying to keep up with the load of farm work and laboring, bringing money into the house. And my great-grandmother had to leave school when she was in the 3rd grade to help take care of the house. She was the only girl left at home, and her mother was ailing too. Her father actually had gotten hit by a bus, but her mother, I believe her mother had scarlet fever, and she stayed home. And there was an insurance salesman that came through who was blind, and he gave them some paperwork, and he told her, to read it to her mom and dad. And she struggled with some of the words and things. And he said, we need to work on your reading. and she always was so pleased of telling me how a blind insurance salesman, you're talking in, very early 1920s, had solidified her reading abilities and helped her out with it. And, she was always one of the best that I ever heard at reading aloud. I loved to sit and listen to her read the Bible and read the newspaper. And she was, there's hardly a professional narrator that I've heard that she couldn't match. Just dramatizing and different things, and just great inflections on everything she read. And it was just a big encouragement to me. But that's sort of where my musical foundations had got started, I guess. I appreciate you guys watching. I know there's a few of you that have told me you get something out of this, and I thank you. I thank you, and I appreciate when people come on and share little tidbits about themselves, because it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me to come to know the people, just not your name, but to know things about you. But please subscribe and, leave us a comment and let us know what's going on in your world. Thank you, guys. Take care.